is that God would bring godly people, godly women in my path in particular about that. And it was really significant because there's lots involved in, preparing that. How do you represent yourself? And it became important years down the road on how we had established our 501c3, which was educational. Could have been faith and education, and I hesitated, and we just did educational. And as it turns out, 18 years later, the event that we were doing, it was significant that we only did it by educational and not by faith, because the school was against faith organization.
Welcome. You're listening to the radio podcast of Voices of a Woman from Creative Encouragement Ministries. This program focuses on giving women a voice to share their stories and how the Lord brought them through challenging situations to live above their circumstances. I hope that this conversation will encourage you and offer you hope in your own journey. Hi, I'm Leanna Wilson, your host, and you're listening to Voices of a Woman. My special guest today is a wife, mother, and grandmother of 13 grandchildren. She has been serving the Lord for many years and has been involved in various areas of ministry throughout her life. She was also the director of a nonprofit organization called It's a Girl Thing, a yearly conference for teen girls, moms, and mentors for around 20 years. She started this ministry with a vision in her heart to minister to young girls. Currently, she is the president of the local chapter of the American Sewing Guild and spends a lot of time with her grandchildren. Welcome, Sarah Pitzer.
Hi, Leanna. How are you?
I'm doing great. I am so glad you're with me today.
I'm glad to be here.
It worked out that the timing was right, and you said, yes, I can be there. And I said, wonderful.
Yeah, and I was reflecting on what you said about my 13 grandchildren, and of that, 10 of them are girls. That's probably why I sew.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. Oh, my goodness. You have 10 girls.
10 girls and 3 boys.
3 boys. Well, almost a boy, right? We have one that's one on the way. How exciting. Well, that is awesome. Now, we've, of course, we work together with It's a Girl Thing. That's been, I think we've known each other over 22 years. I calculate that because my daughter is 22. So I was pregnant with her.
I remember very well you were pregnant with her.
And I was not feeling well that first conference. I think I was
I don't know how you did it.
Doing the T-shirt table, and I think I was the backup to the backup to the backup. And I decided, I'm just in case I'm sick, y'all have this covered. So
isn't that how we work as women?
Oh, goodness. Yes. We okay, sister, take the lead. So Sarah, we're going to just talk a little. We want to talk about It's a Girl Thing. We want to talk about God laying this vision in your heart that you had to start this amazing organization.
Yeah, it really came about because I had teenage daughters who one of the families in our church had moved away and had moved to Austin, and had invited us to come to Austin for a girls' conference, a mother-daughter conference.
Okay.
So I had taken my 2 teenage daughters to meet with her 2 teenage daughters who had been good friends, and since, they had moved. And so this was a great opportunity to just spend some quality time together. But as I sat at that conference, I had some aha moments and felt a sense of this needs to happen in my community, this kind of conference for mothers and daughters to talk about subjects that are pertinent to them. And so I came back and I started talking to other women in my community saying, I have a burden for what girls are going through. And before you know it, I had 13 women who had said, yes, I'm interested, I'm in. And the first thing we did was contact the organization that had done the event in Austin and said, can you come to Corpus Christi, to our community, and do this event? And they went, yeah, but 2 years. Yeah, they promised that they would be interested, but it would be 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And our group kind of rocked on our heels and said, I think we need to do this now.
Wow.
We didn't feel like we could wait 2 years. And so as it developed, we sat around and said, okay, what does it take to make an event happen? And we went through that process together, came up with the name as a group, and came up with a 401c3. And it's interesting how when God leads you to do something, he doesn't necessarily give you the whole picture of what it's going to look like, because if he had, even just filling out the forms to do a 501c3, I would have been backpedaling and saying, not this girl.
Right.
I don't know a thing about that.
Well, there's a lot of details that go into that.
What I learned is that God would bring godly people, godly women in my path in particular about that, who knew how to do all the tax stuff. And she said, let me help you.
Wow.
So she was there for that season while we filled out the paperwork. And it was really significant because there's lots involved in, preparing that. How do you represent yourself? And it became important years down the road on how we had established our 501c3, which was educational. Could have been faith and education, and I hesitated, and we just did educational. And as it turns out, 18 years later, the event that we were doing, it was significant that we only did it by educational and not by faith, because the school was against faith organizations at that time.
Well, I remember when we first started, and you'll attest to this, we had the open door into the public schools to go in and promote this organization. And now you never did it in a church. Why did you decide, you know what, we don't want to do it in a church? It's faith-based, but we don't want to do it in a church.
Well, as I was starting to formulate how this was going to, as I said yes to the Lord, he began to show me as I was, for instance, one day I was driving my son to school, and I saw this sweet girl who's what's called latchkey. And I had this vision of her and realized that church wasn't relevant to her, and she was very impressionable. But I realized that those impressions matter when you're in those formative teen years.
Right.
And she wasn't a bad kid, but she could have gone a bad direction. And that's when I realized this is why women of faith need to be involved with our young people, because they need us to see an example of how Christ operates in this world. And if they don't have that example, where do they get it? If they don't find that the church is relevant to them, then where are they going to turn?
Well, it goes back to mentorship, right? Discipleship and mentorship. Scripture says the older women shall teach the younger. And we don't find that a lot in our society. We don't have a lot of grandmothers that, when they are way up in age, that are around the home very much or around those grandchildren. And not that they couldn't be. And I wonder if it's just the way our society has seen things that way, that we shelve people sometimes.
I think that's true.
And I know that you were, saying, we were talking earlier about, nursing homes and things like that. I mean, you see that happening a lot. But going back to this young lady, how did you determine that this was God's will for you to start this organization?
Well, I saw this girl. I also started talking to my leadership in my church and said, I have a burden for young women and for teens. And I talked with my pastor, and he was wise, because he said, I encourage you to do this in the community and not just at church.
Yeah.
And what I realized, too, is the event that I had been to that inspired me was a church girl event. But I really had a burden for our community and the girl where is she going to hear truth? If the church isn't relevant to them, how do they know? And they're at an impressionable age. Where do they get their values? They get it from the television. They get it from magazines. They need to get it from godly women who can tell them, don't go down this road because it's only heartache.
Yeah. Well, and, now we've got social media. I remember when we first started It's a Girl Thing, we didn't have social media then. We didn't even have YouTube. We didn't have all of those. And as we saw it progress into the years that we did this conference, it was getting harder and harder to get into the public school, even though we held most of those conferences at a school.
Yes, we always did.
We found it challenging. And do you fear that maybe social media had a lot to do with that. Our challenges of, being able to just invite the schools before we had no problem in the early stages.
Well, in the early stages, what was interesting too, the team of 13 women that came about were an interesting mix of people, because I had several teachers that were, and a couple of them were retired teachers. I had some college girls, 3 college girls. There were several just moms like myself. And as we began to pray about how this was going to look, I also realized we're going to touch on some topics that I, as a mom, don't even know how to handle.
Yeah.
And so it was, as I prayed about it, I realized that another aspect of what we needed to offer was Christian counseling there at the event.
Right.
And so we termed that, I just need to talk.
Yeah, I
So that
remember
was
that.
the topic that you could go to. So what we did was we created a conference that you could attend, and as we started looking at topics that we felt girls needed to have access to, we also became more aware that moms needed education and encouragement too.
Yes.
And that they needed equipping as they were raising their daughters. And so it was kind of a shock, because after that first event, we kind of said, we have to offer more to moms.
Yeah. Well, and what I did like about the conference is everyone was able to fill out, what would you like to have next year? What breakout sessions? And I think as a board, we started seeing, like you said, more moms were like, how do I talk to my daughter about this? Or how do I deal with this? In another interview I did, if the moms are 30, 20, 30, 40 years old, they don't know how to deal with their life trying to teach their teenage daughter or son how to live life. Well, if they can't figure it out, then how are they teaching
right.
Where is the mentorship and all of that? So where do you think your greatest maybe struggles or fears about starting a ministry like this? I mean, what were those like?
Well, one of the things I felt that God was teaching me through this process was how to hear his voice. And as I began to struggle with that, I'm a huge advocate of read every Christian book you can get your hands on.
Right.
Because I feel like books are a way that God has inspired someone to write some truth down that will apply to your life. So I just encourage you to look at reading material, good Christian books. And one of the ones that I think most affected my life was a book called Experiencing God.
Yeah.
And that book is by Henry Blackaby. And he wrote some things in there that just really hit me between the eyes and helped me to see how to understand God's will and how to seek God's will. And one of the aspects that I really leaned on was don't go at hearing one voice in your head. Say you hear one voice in your head, because you need the affirmation of others. So I would encourage you, if you're feeling a call to ministry, that you not only follow that because you feel the call, but because you then network or talk to other people that you trust that know the Lord. And that was my pastor as we talked with him. And he had the wisdom to say, I really think you need to do this in the community and not just in a church girl event.
Right.
And I kind of realized when we started that churches have the opportunity to do girl events, mother-daughter events. But where does the community have? Where do our school kids get the exposure to hear godly women say, here's truth, and here's the lie that you hear from TV or the media? I think that's very important.
Well, and also if you have it, say, we talked about this, is if you had it at a certain church, then, well, you're associated just with that church. This is just this church's event versus doing it in the community that not only invited the schools, the community, but all the churches could come together. I mean, we had people of all different faiths there. I mean, denominational faiths and the Christian faith. It was really beautiful to see that, girls groups from, all different aspects. And so I think, what do you think was the most challenging? Because I'm thinking on my own personal level, the most challenging for getting the word out to the churches and the schools and different organizations? What was where was that challenge?
Again, God would bring along godly women into my life that knew how to do some of that networking. It certainly was a God thing to have a Christian friend who's a radio personality that knew
I wonder who
to,
that is.
knew how to MC the event, because I couldn't do it. As much as I love to talk, I would have probably stood on a stage and gone the whole afternoon. But yes, God taught me some things about find godly women, stay in your lane, learn, from others. But seeking God's will is a huge part of staying focused.
Sure.
Finding God's will and purpose for your life. In this case, mine was this ministry, but yours may be something completely different. But you still need the foundation of how do you know where you stand, how do you know where to go, and then once you see it, the other thing that Henry Blackaby talks about in his book is saying, get on board. Not only when you see that the ministry is fine-tuning itself, or the mission that you want to say yes to starts to formulate, then you have to be also willing to take action. It does no good for you to lay on your bed every night and pray about it. You got to put feet to it. Truth
to that. I mean, what good is it to you to sign up for a class, but if you never go to the class and never do anything with the material and information? So with every organization, there are different challenges and struggles. What did you find most challenging about it?
I think we initially, when we started the event, the school system was very on board with us.
Yeah.
There was actually an abstinence educator in our ISD at the time. And then over time, as we began to do more of these events, which we always did in a school, that position went away. And we as a team had said that we would continue to do the ministry until we felt the door was no longer open. And we finally did come to a point where we felt that to be the case.
Sure. I know it was challenging. I mean, of course, we would advertise. I work with Ruth Iperspa, and we would do media relations. I did all the voiceovers for the TV, radio commercials. Would go to the interviews and radio and TV, and we were always working in that direction to getting it out. But really, that was just the public knowing about it, but actually bringing the girls. I think it's just being able to get in with the youth ministers, women's leaders in the different churches. I think I found that very challenging at times to get them. You have to relay your vision to them, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And obviously, God. We're the conduit of being willing to make those connections and communicate with people, but God did the work.
Amen. Yeah.
And it was very exciting to bring in a national writer, bring in a national musician, see them rock the house, and just feel God's presence as He worked. And you could sense that girls were making changes in their lives that were going to be lifelong.
Yeah. And I even have young ladies now that say, I remember when y'all used to do that conference. I remember that. It was fun. My mom and I went, or I went with my school. And yeah, I remember that. That was really, really cool. And I think another thing, too, it's this kind of on a lighter, funnier note, that, you got 13 women putting their heads together to do a conference. Is where they say you get a room full of women and you get a million opinions, and sometimes our meetings would go kind of long, but I remember taking some of those meetings were spent in just prayer. I remember those being my favorite meetings. We were like, you know what, we're having a meeting today, but we're just praying, and we just would really see the Lord move.
Absolutely. And I saw a group of women who, some of them were on that board for the whole time.
I was one of them.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was fun.
Well, God honors faithfulness, and I really feel strongly about that. some of the principles of what I stand for is God says He honors faithfulness to a second generation.
Yes. We were talking about this before we started recording, that each one of the women had a different role. You weren't particularly one-on-one with the girls so much as, you were the person that got everything organized. I mean, explain some of the roles that some of the women played. What was your role? Each of us were part of the body, right?
Absolutely. I guess I would say maybe my role was a visionary, was to say, this is what I see as the plan, and how we go about it was meted out through the team as we would work through a season and start planning the sessions and planning the topics and planning, the overall theme. Those were all things that were part and parcel. But it was interesting that you'd have 13 women that worked together so well, and there was very little, if any, friction.
Right.
How rare is that?
Yeah, exactly. That's the Lord, right?
That is the Lord.
That's the Lord. So I know that, we had one person that just did.
Yes, we had one person that obviously did the emceeing. We had one person that was planning breakout sessions. We had another gal who was planning counseling. We had counseling provided, like I mentioned earlier, at all the events, and a local counseling center was very involved in the follow-up. I guess because I backtrack, but because I, as a mom, realized we're going to touch on some topics that even I, as a mom, don't know how to handle. And that's when it became an aha moment to realize we've got to have Christian counselors there.
Yeah.
We also had a policy that was we always looked at everyone's lecture.
Oh,
their
yes.
presentation.
Yeah, their presentation.
Their presentation ahead of time, because we wanted to be sure that it was Christian women who did the sessions and not just anybody who wanted to come and have a topic. So we handpicked all of the speakers, and they had to meet our criteria as and that was part of the job of the gal who planned the sessions. And sometimes we had 40 breakout sessions.
Yeah,
I remember that. It was not a small
that.
thing. So then you had different ones that also were on the board, and some of those were presenters.
Yeah.
Who shared their life stories, because they have amazing life stories. And so, all of that was, and obviously then you have the financial person, and you have the treasurer and the secretary, all those parts.
Right, and then a grant person. We were writing grants, and I know you worked on some of those as well. And I mean, there's a lot of challenges. I'm sure, like you mentioned earlier, like if God would have showed you everything right up front, you would have been like, "Oh no,
not this girl. I would have been running the other
I didn't
direction.
sign up for this, Lord. I didn't sign up for that." So, are you glad
So
that
I'm praising God that yes, He didn't give me the whole picture.
Yes.
When you say yes, Lord, He doesn't always give you the full picture.
And so, are you glad you walked through that process?
Oh, absolutely.
Are there a few things, or anything that you would have done differently?
The only thing I can think of that I would have done differently is I tended to want to push what God was doing. In other words, what I mean is, like the first event we did, I remember we had this amazing speaker who and a musician who was so godly, and then the speaker got up, and she was a 50-something-year-old, and I'm thinking, are these young people going to relate to her? Oh, Lord, how are they going to relate to her? Well, then she opened her mouth and says, girls, I so admire this singer who's a young, godly girl. She says, but I want you to know that was not my story. And then I got quiet and realized I'm getting ahead of God here. I was anxious about how are they going to receive this woman who God empowered to speak. And when she shared her story of how she'd been in a tough home life, etc., then the girls who were from that kind of life totally could relate. And I suddenly, God had me in my place.
Yeah. I think as I remember, especially through the years being the MC, and we did a lot of Q&A sessions with sometimes the speaker, the vocalist that came to minister, as well as some of our counselors and other mentoring women. It's the questions that always got me, and especially from the middle school age girls, that I feel that there's not a lot of sometimes the filter hasn't quite filtered yet. And I remember those questions going, I would, I'm there just emceeing, letting them use the microphone, thinking, whoa, I'm glad I don't have to answer that question. And thankfully, we had those Christian counselors there with the wisdom that they had.
Yes, yes.
Okay, Sarah, let's just go back a little bit. I know we've talked about it's a girl thing, and I want to kind of go back. Just tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you were raised. I mean, what kind of family life did you have growing up?
Oh, well, I was raised in a home where my father was military, and so we traveled probably half of my lifetime was spent overseas. So because we moved a lot, I guess we experienced a lot of different churches. Mm-hmm. My parents were both believers and brought us, we attended church with regularity. I felt like I was just an average kid, accepted Christ as a child, realized that I was a sinner, and it was just a very simple, easy thing to go forward and say, yes, I want to ask Christ into my heart. And I don't really feel like I did anything unique as a young believer or even as in my early years. And I don't think it was until I was 40 years old that taking my girls, deciding that this was an event that I wanted to take my girls to, that I really ever heard God speaking to me and saying very clearly, this is something you need to be involved in. And it's interesting how when you start to hear God's voice, He would wake me up at night. I would wake up at night and say, I still feel I need to do something like this event that I had been to, and He wouldn't let me rest. I would kind of put it aside in my brain and go on with my busy life, and then I would wake up in the night with feeling like someone was tapping me on the shoulder and saying, what are you going to do about this?
Wow, that's cool.
And so that's when I kind of started, I guess, having the courage to start saying things to other women, even just women I went to church with, and say, I have a real heart for young women. There's how do we reach girls that don't hear truth? How do they hear truth? So I started asking those questions.
You have been listening to the radio podcast of Voices of a Woman from Creative Encouragement Ministries. My guest today was Sarah Pitzer, and she shared her journey of starting a girls' conference called It's a Girl Thing. We're going to pick up with her story on the next episode. This program focuses on giving women a voice to share their stories and how the Lord brought them through challenging situations to live above their circumstances. For more information about Voices of a Woman, Creative Encouragement Ministries, and to listen to more radio podcasts, visit us on Facebook at Creative Encouragement and on Instagram at Creative Encouragement 247. Creative Encouragement, encouraging women and connecting lives.